Hi, I'm Cynthia, and I am one of the lead teachers of the Yoga Soup 200 and 300 hour teacher training. I'm in Santa Barbara, California. I've been studying and teaching yoga for 20 years. And I thought it would be fun to do a little series on the subtle body, what's called the subtle body in yoga. It's one of the things that I teach. Because really, what do we call the subtle body and what are the origins of that? I know that we have the models that we look at in our common modern language, and that includes like the nadis and the chakras and things that actually have a really long and rich history. And, what does that mean with regards to our yoga practice? Because we're all so interested in the subtle body. So it might be interesting for you to know, for example, that the chakras come out of the Shaiva Shakta Tantras. So like once the goddess became part of the religious worldview in certain Indian communities, in the, let's say, the 500s and 600s of the Common Era, this is when the chakras became more systematized. Now, were there individual chakras before that? Yes, in the Patanjali Yoga Shastra, there is the naming of these individual chakras. But in terms of a systemization, it comes out of a system called the Vidya Pitta, which is the inclusion of the goddess. So once the goddess gets included. Now, isn't it interesting that so many of us nowadays are really interested in the goddess? There's this resurgence, there's this curiosity coming through. Who is she? And what were these divine female aspects? They were complex. They weren't always just these wonderful, benevolent creatures. As a matter of fact, in some of these earlier texts, they were more like witches or vampires. So the yogini would access these chakras in the beginning. In one of the texts that hasn't yet been translated into English. And really there's one scholar primarily who's been working on the text. Her name is Olga Serbayeva. And the text is called the Jayadratha Yamala. It was probably written down, compiled between 800 and 900 of the Common Era. But the chakras in this has a lot to do with these yoginis, because the petals of the chakras, the lotus petals, would have these tubes, these nodules connected to them, and that would connect to another person. And it was through these means, really, that these yoginis, these really dangerous, subversive creatures, sometimes they were human females, sometimes they were divinities, they were something in between. They would use these incantations as a means to go into and possess somebody's subtle body and kind of like suck it dry. It was very vampiric, like the sucking out of their subtle body. And about that same time period, there really is the first systemization of the chakras, and that is in a text called the Netra Tantra. So in this fascinating text, this amazing text of early Shakta Shaiva Tantra, you have a systemization of very definite, these 16 points of energy. And again, this is associated with goddesses and the divine feminine, but it's also associated with guru yoga. And really what is happening in this text is, there's a lot happening in the text, but it's almost like some of these elements of possession, of like going in and sucking a subtle body and consuming it and making a person die. The guru actually is in a totally different role. So the guru does almost like an altruistic possession. So now a guru might go in and take a king's subtle body and place it into his heart. And he'll then purify that subtle body and then give it back. So you can think of this as a totally different approach to, like, let's say, possession as beneficial. And you would want somebody in your cabinet, if you were a king, who has the skill, really the remarkable skill to use breath and mantra in this unique combination to be able to do this kind of altruistic possession. So in the same text, we have this first systemization of the chakras. And in this, you have something that comes up again and again, which is the chakras associated with sound. So in the nature tantra, there's 16 chakras. And that relates probably to the 16 vowels of the Sanskrit syllabary, a, I, I, U, re, ri, re, e, I, o, ow, a. And by allowing the breath to get so subtle and so potent that it becomes absolutely empowered. And you can think of like the absolute potential of sound when it's about to disappear into stillness, and also if you were to turn that sound around, and how much power it has to create everything that exists. And you take that sound through the mantra aham, which is I am, and like a needle piercing the center, the sound pierces these chakras. And you have this image of these chakras that are then pierced by this subtle vibration of the mantra, the sound, and the breath. And the energy rises upward. And it then comes to rest at the top of the head. And from there, it either stays and coalesces in the top of the head, or then the body becomes flooded back again with the power that has been harvested through this chanting process. So these are some of the earliest descriptions of chakras, how they relate specifically after the goddess has been included in some of these yogic traditions. Clearly in the Orthodox Brahminical world, women are not included. So you really start to see the inclusion of women coming through and redefining the subtle body, redefining, like possession, and then perhaps the power of mantra and breath, and organizing that in such a way that it creates a deep internal alignment. And this is how the goddess gets included. And this is how the lasting impact of these goddess inclusive lineages have their place in yoga. And they start to weave into the practices of yoga until yoga really becomes a combination of this like psycho-spiritual practice that has to do with the body, and that has to do with the subtle body, and that has to do with this like technology of deep awakening. And where is that awakening happening? It's happening up in the center, and it's happening in the heart. I hope you enjoyed that information, and we'll talk soon.